This morning we start the story of a man named Daniel. Daniel's story starts about 600 years before the birth of Jesus. You see, Daniel was a young man who lived in Jerusalem and was growing up there with his family. At the time that Daniel was a child, the city of Jerusalem was a beautiful place with a beautiful temple, with strong walls. It had been a place where God had been worshipped and honored for 400 or 500 years. Many good things and many great stories that you know from the Bible had already taken place here in Jerusalem. But there was a mighty king in Babylon named Nebuchadnezzar. And there were problems in Jerusalem. The people were not always honoring God. They were not always helping each other. The rich were taking advantage of the poor. The strong were imposing themselves upon the weak. People weren't really acting the way they should. And so God allowed Nebuchadnezzar, this mighty king of Babylon, to come to Jerusalem and destroy the walls. Not only did he destroy the walls, but he took many people captive. Specifically, he brought out the young men that came from good homes, from royal homes, and he took them as hostages and moved them back to the town of Babylon. So after Jerusalem was destroyed, Nebuchadnezzar led as captive many of the young men of Jerusalem back to his hometown of Babylon. Babylon was a great city on the Tigris and Euphrates River, and Nebuchadnezzar was a powerful king ruling over a great many lands. And what Nebuchadnezzar would do when he conquered a land is he would bring some of the young men back and he would begin to train them. They would go to school and they would be educated in the ways of the Babylonian. They would be taught the language of the Babylonians. They would be taught the history of Babylon. We would say they were being indoctrinated into the ways of Nebuchadnezzar's kingdom. Because Nebuchadnezzar knew if he could train these young men to be loyal to him, then they would be of great benefit to him. I wonder who's training us. I wonder who we will be loyal to when we grow up. Not only did Nebuchadnezzar teach them, but he saw to their physical health. In the great palace there in Babylon, these young men grew up. And these young men not only learned at the school of Nebuchadnezzar, but they were invited to eat at the king's table. And wonderful food was served to them at the table by Nebuchadnezzar's servants. But there were some problems with that food. And there was something important to Daniel and to his 3 friends. Daniel and his friends knew that they could not defeat Nebuchadnezzar. But they also knew that God could. They also knew that God was bigger than Nebuchadnezzar and that God's kingdom would endure even this time of hardship. So Daniel and his friends wanted to stay faithful to God. And one of the ways that they chose to do that was to refuse to eat the food from the king's table. They spoke to the man who was in charge of their food and told him that they did not want to eat the king's meat, which probably had been sacrificed to idols and represented participation in worship of false gods. The man said, if I don't feed you, if I don't care for you, if you aren't healthy and strong, the king will kill me. Daniel and his friends worked out a deal. They said, if you will let us go 10 days without eating the meat from the king, then you can look at us and see how healthy we are and decide what will happen next. So the man agreed, and the young men, for the next 10 days, didn't eat the meat that the king offered them that had been sacrificed to idols. They only ate vegetables. They only drank water. And this commitment to the kind of food they ate reminded them that Nebuchadnezzar might be the king, but Nebuchadnezzar was not God. They chose to put their faith in God, to keep their attention on God. And after 10 days, they came back to the man who was in charge of their food. And he looked at them in amazement. They looked healthier and stronger, more vibrant than the other young men who had been eating the meat from the king's table. I wonder why they looked so healthy. I wonder where they were getting their strength. So he agreed to continue letting them just eat the vegetables. When it came to the classroom, these young men excelled. They learned the language of the Babylonians. They learned the customs of the Babylonians. And in every test they took, every question they were asked, they showed great wisdom because something was blessing them. Do you know who was blessing them? God was with these young men, these teenagers that were growing up, and He was blessing them with great wisdom, with great knowledge, with great strength. And in particular, Daniel was blessed with the power to understand people's dreams and to tell them what they meant. These young boys were faithful as exiles in a foreign land. They did things to remind themselves that God was with them. What have you done this week, or not done this week, that reminds you of God's love and God's presence? What could we do next week? I pray that in the week ahead we will keep our eyes on the cross, that we will be reminded of God's presence with us, and that we will know He is always near. And next time, we will learn another story about these young boys who grew into strong men, exiled in the land of Babylon. May God be with you wherever you go, whatever you do this week.